My father's at home not feeling well today. I know a lot of us are struggling with this, but it seemed to have hit him pretty hard in his chest. He got a lot of congestion, not able to speak. So I'm trying to fill in for him this morning. I'm having a little trouble myself. Been, again, having to take so much cold medicine. I think, like they say, the remedy's worse than the disease. I hate cold medicine. It makes me feel miserable. And so I'm struggling with that, and I ask you to bear with me. You know, it's the thing about influence. You don't always know who you're going to influence. I shared with you all the time before, when Arthur was about, I guess, 3 years old, he was sitting on his front porch in my backyard, and I was walking down the driveway to the lake, and I saw him on the front porch, and as I was walking by, I did that number, at him. He just looked at me like, what in the world? And a few days later, I'd forgotten all about it. A few days later, I went up to their front porch, and he was standing on the front porch again. As I walked over, I said, "Hey, Arthur, how are you?" He went, and I'm like, well, apparently he took note of it and remembered it. I thought, that's cute. He saw that. I noticed my grandson, James, growls at me a lot. And it didn't occur to me until a few days ago. We were playing at the house, and I was growling at my grandchildren. I didn't realize I did that until I noted he growls at me. And I don't know if it's genetic or if he learned it from me. But in a playful way, he kind of growls at me, and I kind of growl back at him. I don't know where he might have learned it somewhere else. But one thing is for sure, children do learn from us, and we are influencing them. But it's not just our grandchildren or our children. We influence everybody. And we are ourselves influenced. Now, Jesus referenced this influence in Matthew 5 when he said, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light to all that are in the house. Even so, let your light so shine." Now, when he uses that expression, so shine, in other words, he's saying exert your influence in such a way that you will bring glory and honor to God. That's what he's telling us to do with our lives. Of course, he also warned the apostles on one occasion, Matthew 16, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. They thought he was talking about food. Typically, that's what we're thinking about on Lord's Day. We're here to worship God. We're thinking about the roast back home, but they're thinking about food, and he wasn't talking about food. He was talking about their doctrine, their teaching. Don't be influenced by the Pharisees. And Paul warned the Corinthians, evil companions corrupt good morals. So we need to be careful who we listen to, who we associate with, etc. Influence is a powerful thing. When you read the book of Acts, you find that the early church was very influential in a very positive way. In Acts 17, someone noted that the apostles in their preaching had turned the world upside down. Wouldn't it be grand if people today could say of us in the Lord's church that we've turned the world upside down? Now, when you look at it historically, and we're doing this on Wednesday nights, and I've been kind of rehashing some of my church history, and kind of fascinating to see how that's dovetailing what I'm saying this morning. But when you look at the early church, you see the tremendous influence for good Christianity was on the Roman Empire. I mean, the Roman Empire was a powerful force to be reckoned with itself. It exerted great influence throughout the world, the known world at its time. But it also had its pitfalls, it had its weaknesses. I think in Daniel's dream, not Daniel's, but Nebuchadnezzar's dream that Daniel interpreted, the legs and feet were mixed with iron and clay. So it had strength and it had weaknesses in it. And among the many weaknesses were its moral failings. The Romans were noted for their tolerance of just about everything. Any god, any religion, until Christianity came along, and they had a problem with that because it became more of a political challenge than a religious question for them. Because when the Christians said there's only one Lord and Caesar's not him, they thought of that as being disloyal to the state. But other than that, they were very tolerant people. They tolerated any lifestyle. You could marry your mother. You could have relations with your sister. You could dress up like a woman if you're a man. You could be homosexual, you could like little boys, you could, whatever you wanted to do. If a mother wanted to discard her baby, she could take it and throw it out in the yard and let the elements deal with it. Through infanticide, they would destroy their own offspring. They had abortion clinics. They killed millions of babies, just as we do. Homosexuality was rampant in Roman culture, as you know. Crucifixion was the favorite way of teaching people a lesson. It was a very cruel manner in killing people. And of course, they had their entertainment in the gladiatorial games where people were actually fed to wild lions or burned alive at the stake. It was very barbaric. Now, with the influence of Christianity, infanticide would be outlawed. Abortion would be outlawed. Homosexuality would be outlawed. Crucifixion would be outlawed. The gladiatorial games would be outlawed. There were many radical changes that came into the Roman world as a result of the influence of Christianity. It was a powerful force to be reckoned with, but then something happened. The emperor of Rome decided to utilize the Christian community, and so he legalized Christianity, made it the state religion, and everything changed. So the church that had been persecuted and yet a powerful influence is now embraced by the state, and its power diminishes significantly. Well, that brings me to today and the question that I want us to confront today. When you read the book of Acts, and I've just referenced that a moment ago, we think of the Acts of the Apostles, and that's a fair designation because we're primarily looking at Peter, the first half, and Paul in the second half, and a few others interspersed here and there. But it's not just the Acts of the Apostles, it's the Acts of the early Christians. And I think that's just as fair a designation. How did those early Christians behave, and what kind of success did they have? And so we have the book of Acts. It's a powerful book, and I recommend it to you. I suggest you be familiar with it and share it with your friends and family members, etc., so on and so forth. But I want to raise this question. What if we had an inspired writer today, and he were writing a second book of Acts? And this second book of Acts has to do with the church as we know it, the church of today. What would be said, and what could accurately be said of the church of the here and now, of the 21st century? When you look at, let's just kind of take a few moments to illustrate what I'm saying. In Acts chapter 2, for example, verse 44, the Bible says that all that were together, all that believed were together and had all things in common, and they sold their possessions and goods and parted them to all men as every man had need. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. And again, in Acts 4:32, the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things common. There's no question that one of the secret ingredients to the success of the early church was the unity that was prevailing among early Christians. They were of one heart, one soul, one mind. They didn't bicker and fuss about, hey, you took advantage of me, you took this from, whatever I have is yours, and yours is mine. They were together, had all things common, no one lacked anything. What a wonderful description of the people of God we read in the early chapters of the book of Acts. I wonder if someone were writing an accurate description of us, what the chapter on unity would read like if it were be written about us. Well, yeah, we were all together and had all things common. We stood behind the elders as long as they decided in our favor. As long as they did the kind of things we thought they should do. As long as the preacher lived his life the way we thought he should live his life and made the kind of decisions we think he should make. We were all together, had all things common. But the minute they did something I didn't agree with, well, Can you imagine just how that chapter on unity would be written? Or what about this question? Again, in Acts chapter 4, verse 36, we read that Joseph, who by the apostles was surnamed Barnabas, which is being interpreted, the son of consolation, a Levite of the country of Cyprus, having land, sold it and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. And this is just one of many examples that can be cited from the first book of Acts that shows us, it demonstrates clearly that those early Christians were willing to give and give and give and sacrifice personal possessions. Now, I remember when I first started reading the book of Acts, as a very young man, I thought to myself, this just doesn't seem practical. If you have a house and you sell it, where are you going to live? Brother McGarvey had written an extensive series of lectures on the book of Acts and commentary on the book of Acts. And he made this observation. When Luke tells us that they having land or houses sold them, he meant they had other land besides the land they lived on. They had other houses besides the one they lived in. They weren't selling the house or the roof out from under them, so they would have to be in need themselves. They were simply saying, we're going to take what most of us today would think of as our inheritance. This is what I'm going to live on when I retire. This is my retirement. They were taking their retirement accounts. They were taking their holdings. They were liquidating their holdings so they could share those proceeds with those who were in need. That's really tremendous. I wonder how many of us, when we hear about a need, comes along, are we willing to share with our inheritance, with our retirement, that we're willing to take what we say is mine and work years to have that, to accumulate that. And my parents have really set aside this for my inheritance, for my well-being and my children's well-being. I mean, it'd be foolish of me to give. That's how we reason. That's how I've heard it reasoned. I just wonder if the situation called for it, what would this chapter on giving look like? Would we be told that those 21st century Christians had a hard time keeping up with their denominational friends in their programs of work and sending out missionaries because they barely had enough money to keep the lights on and pay the mortgage? I'm just asking an honest question. What would honestly be said about us when it comes to our giving? What about Acts chapter 6? As we look at the first book of Acts, in those days when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. The 12 called the multitude of disciples unto them and said, it is not reason that we should leave the word of God and serve tables. Wherefore, brethren, look you out among you 7 men of honest report, full of the Holy Ghost and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will give ourselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word. And the saying pleased the whole multitude, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Ghost, etc., etc. You remember how this story ends. Beautiful story. But even in this early stage of Christianity, like every group, problems inevitably will arise. There's just going to be conflict. When you put a bunch of people together, there's going to be something that's left undone or that's not attended to properly. There will be issues that have to be hammered out. How do we deal with those? Well, there's several thoughts I want to share with you about this. First of all, the problem was addressed head on without giving it time to fester. I think sometimes we shy away from dealing with problems because we're afraid if we deal with a problem, it's going to get worse. Well, I've learned from experience, if you don't deal with a problem, it's going to get worse. And so if you see a problem, you're aware of it, deal with it. Don't let it fester and don't let it ferment. It was handled with diplomacy. Notice the apostle said, look out from among yourselves. We're not going to just order you and tell you these are the ones to be in charge. We're going to ask you to make that decision. The apostle didn't say, we're going to meet in closed-door meetings and then hand down our decision to you. They involved the whole congregation in this matter. I believe we see the golden rule being exercised here. Who doesn't want to have their thoughts and their opinion, their input in any major decision like this? And the apostles recognized that. They were willing to delegate as apostles so that they didn't have to deal with every mundane matter that comes along. They had their business to tend to. We need to appoint special servants who will tend to this business. Everybody needs a job. Let's make sure everybody gets assigned a task. But we don't all need to be burdened with just doing it all ourselves. And of course, the method in all of this produced peace and growth in the congregation. And finally, the congregation accepted the decision from their leaders. They didn't grumble. They didn't complain. They didn't say, the apostles should have just handled it themselves. They made us get involved. They were happy with the decision. I wonder if the chapter on resolving church problems were written about this congregation, what could honestly be said? I believe, and I've learned this from experience, I don't care how you address certain situations. Unfortunately, some members of the church will simply never be satisfied. You will never make them happy. I don't care what you do, or how you do it, or how often you do it, or how few times you do it. It doesn't make any difference. They're determined and destined to be unhappy, and they want everyone else to be unhappy. I wonder if that would be said of this congregation. What about chapter 12 of the book of Acts? Here's a very self-serving chapter I'd like to share with you. About that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. When he had apprehended him, he put him in prison, delivered him to the 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after the Passover to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. Peter was one of their preachers. And when he was in trouble, and when he was in need, the church got together and prayed for him. I wonder what the chapter would read like today if we were writing a second book of Acts and how preachers were treated. I don't know what it is. And I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a moment. You call it self-serving. I think it's something we all need to think about. And we think about ourselves in comparing ourselves with, for example, our denominational friends. I've heard you say, and I've said, we've all wondered out loud sometimes, how is it these denominational churches seem to grow and prosper and do so well? Well, a number of answers could be given to that, but I submit to you, at the top of the list would be the manner in which those churches treat their preachers. Now, granted, they probably put too much of a premium on their preachers. They probably think too highly of their preachers. But if they think too highly of their preachers, and I'm just making a general, I'm not grumbling, I'm not fussing, I'm just making an observation. In churches of Christ, we've gone to the other extreme. And I think we've gone to the point where it's just ingrained. It's almost in our theological DNA. We come up from the Baptist, I hate preachers. And preachers are going to have to be kept under our foot at all times. And whatever the preacher does, it's going to have to be questioned. And we're going to have to make sure he doesn't make too much money. And he doesn't have too much time with his family. And I mean, I don't understand what is going on with gospel preachers among God's people. It just doesn't make any sense. And I'm not saying this about myself personally. I mean, I've been the victim of it. But I think every gospel preacher would say the same thing. I'm not unique in this. Perhaps it goes back to the days of Alexander Campbell. You never met him. I never met him. I read a lot about him. I do know that he was a very wealthy man. He never received pay from the church, and he discouraged churches from paying their preachers. Now, I'm going to say something else. You're going to think I'm self-serving, but I'm stating a biblical fact now. In Galatians chapter 6. Paul said, if we sow to the Spirit, we shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. How does someone sow to the Spirit? Look at the context. Let him who is taught in the Word share with him that teaches in all good things. What does that mean? Well, if you have someone teaching you, you should take care of the one who's teaching you. That's the context of sowing to the Spirit. We shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Let's get back to my denominational point. Denominational preachers are put on a pedestal. Granted, they are thought too highly of. For sure, no one's going to argue that point. They pay their preachers well. In fact, when I was in school, I knew Methodist preachers that did not believe there was a God to be served. And they didn't believe certainly the Bible was his word, but they were going to be preachers in the Methodist church because the Methodist church takes good care of their preachers. And you say, he's preaching for money. You think that's unheard of? We go back to the days of Balaam. I mean, Numbers 22, Old Testament stuff. This has been around for a long period of time. Sure, there's good money to be had there. I'm not trying to suggest that we go to that extreme. I'm saying, what would the chapter look like if you were to hear how business meetings are conducted about the business of the preacher and how we treat the preacher and what we think of the preacher and the stuff we say about the preacher at lunch on Sunday afternoon, etc., etc. What would that chapter look like? I'm just saying, in Acts chapter 12, when their preacher got into trouble, the whole church got together and prayed for him. And I think that would be a good thing. I'll tell you this, I need your prayers. I need them desperately. And every preacher needs the prayers of the church. And if you don't like me, try praying for me. And I guarantee you, if you pray for me, even though you may consider me your enemy, if you pray for me, in time you'll soften your feeling toward me because you can't dislike someone you're praying for. That's, I think, the beauty of prayer. Yes, you had a comment?
I think it's dealing with being common. The Church of Christ preachers being that common man, that spiritual man, instead of preaching that the minister or the preacher needs to minister at times. But I have witnessed the idleness in the church on preaching, and I think that is a big problem in the Church of Christ today. That a lot of our preachers get away with anything.
Yeah.
And so that caused disturbance with the congregation.
Yeah.
And they call disbelief with the preacher. That's the problem one of the problems issue I say that I have been witnessing myself, friends as well as family.
Sure.
That's
Idleness. You say idleness?
Idle.
Yeah, idle, yeah.
The congregation, certain people in the congregation can make idol out of a preacher without even knowing it. And so then you have the preachers, a lot of them will show respect of person.
Yeah.
They'll deal with one and won't deal with the other.
Oh, yeah.
With this group and won't deal with that group. What we call cliques.
Yeah, they're my friends. These are my friends, yeah.
Yeah, but so they can do it.
But I don't like anybody, so for me, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
And very few people like me, so, But I understand what you're saying. Generally, that's true of other preachers that you got this preacheritis thing going on where, people.
You started that, I'm just saying.
But you don't want. I hear your point. It's a good point. And churches do tend to do that. They idolize their preacher. I don't know many that do, but I know that, in fact, in denominational churches, they do that quite a bit. And in other congregations I'm not as familiar with, perhaps they do that.
Okay, so you take a minister, a preacher. I have seen this here, and it was a feeding, and they were running out of food. So they take care of the preacher through paying the preacher, scripture they paying the preacher they're supposed to. But this instance, it kind of bothered me. But this individual asked for something to eat, and they told that individual they didn't have any more. They didn't have. And so the individual was leaving the way home. So when the preacher who had eaten already walked back into the cafeteria, they gave him more food.
Yeah, that's not right.
See, and so because they idle this problem.
See, I don't even go through the line. I do what they call grazing when we have fellowship meals. I go around and talk to people and eat while I'm talking. That way nobody knows what I'm doing. You have to disguise it, but
But what I'm saying is the way that they
Sure.
come with
Sure. Yeah. But that's unbelievable.
It seems small, but it's a big deal.
No, that is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
I mean, the man's already eaten. Why would someone have to go hungry? There's a chapter, in fact, 1 Corinthians 11 that talks about that.
Yeah, and as well as the love of your fellow man.
Well, yeah, the golden rule, you know. And why would I not let you have what I've already possessed myself? I mean, yeah, I agree. That's not right. I'm just saying that from my experience, and yours may be different, it seemed to be going in the other direction. You know, the preachers generally thought very little of and always suspected of something not good, always criticized in a backhanded sort of way for no good reason. You know, so it can go either way. You can idolize him, or you can overly criticize him. But how we treat our preachers makes a big difference in how well the church will progress or not. So that's something perhaps we all need to take note of. And I'm just saying that in Acts chapter 12, the church there prayed for their preacher. Now, if Peter had already eaten, he didn't need to eat when someone else was going without. But they certainly would pray for him if he's in prison. And I'm just saying that if our preacher is struggling, we need to pray for him rather than gather together and talk badly about it, you know, and find some fault with it. How about, we have time for one more? No, we don't, do we? Is our time expired? I got 2 minutes. All right. Those are good comments, by the way. Why are you laughing at me?
I just want to make one comment.
Yeah.
I've noticed when I've been away from where I sit down to eat and you have me by my table, I've had a few things missing on it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. You learn how to graze. You got to be subtle about it. You can't be so upfront about it.
So your version of grazing is equal to off everybody else?
Yes, exactly. See, I don't get in the line because it looks like, you know, I'm getting in front of everybody. So I just wait and talk and, you know, mingle and eat.
But you know that they put you preacher in the position of flawless.
Do they?
You can't make a mistake. Now, so you gotta watch.
Well, I'm glad you told me that. All right, thank y'all for your time. It was a short class, but hopefully we got something to think about. Are we going to use this podium up here? Does anybody know? Are we using this up here? Do I?